Lone Omega carried the poisoned wolf 6 miles through a blizzard. The Alpha King claimed her as Luna. The wind tore through the forest like a wounded animal, shrieking and howling through the skeletal trees. Snow fell in thick, blinding curtains, coating the ground and bending the branches into jagged, frozen arcs. Somewhere beyond the frozen expanse, a wolf's howl pierced the storm, but it was distant, lonely, a sound Lyra knew all too well. She moved carefully, each step a battle against the biting cold. Her boots sank into the snow, ice clinging to the hem of her cloak.
Her hands were numb, her cheeks stinging, yet she pressed on.
She had to carry him 6 miles through this blizzard. That was all that mattered.
And he weighed more than 100 burdens. Rylan, the Alpha King of a pack she had never dared approach. The wolf who had struck fear into every heart in the Northern Territories. He lay unconscious in her arms, his chest rising and falling shallowly, poisoned by some unknown treachery. His golden eyes had stared into death, yet somehow she had found him before it claimed him completely. Lyra's muscles screamed in protest, her body trembling under his weight. She had always been called defective by her own abandoned pack, left alone at the edge of the mountains when she was only 5 years old. Weak. Flawed. Unworthy. Yet now the only thing keeping Rylan alive was her strength, her courage, and her refusal to give in. She stumbled over a hidden root, snow spraying into the air. The Alpha groaned softly, a sound that made her chest tighten. She froze, praying he hadn't woken. His hand twitched slightly against her arm. That tiny movement reminded her he was alive. He was breathing. He would not die while she still drew air in her lungs. The forest seemed endless. The trees formed dark shadows against a white storm, stretching like jagged teeth. Lyra's mind wandered briefly to the story she had heard as a child. Wolves cursed by old magic, wandering the ice, never finding rest. She shivered, the cold gnawing at her bones, and wondered if she too had been cursed to wander alone. A howl shattered her thoughts. It was close this time. Urgent, familiar. She paused, scanning the swirling snow. Wolves. Packs. Hunters. Anything could be lurking in the storm, drawn to the scent of the Alpha's blood. Her grip on Rylan tightened instinctively. He was heavier than any burden she had ever borne, yet she could not abandon him. Not now. Not ever. Hours passed. Though time felt meaningless in the white void. Her legs ached, her lungs burned, and the frost-bitten tips of her fingers ached with every heartbeat. Yet still she trudged forward. The storm seemed alive, testing her, punishing her for daring to defy the world's cruelty. She whispered prayers to no one, words meant only for herself, begging the wind to stay gentle, the snow to ease, the forest to allow her passage. And then the forest opened to a ridge, a cliff overlooking a frozen valley. The wind screamed even louder here, carrying snow like shards of glass. Lyra clutched Rylan tighter, her body pressed against his as she fought against the storm's fury. She had no choice but to descend. The path was narrow, treacherous, each step a gamble between survival and falling into the icy abyss below. A memory came unbidden, her mother's face, cold and accusing. "You were never meant to belong," she had said. The words had haunted her every step, every breath. Yet now, carrying the Alpha through the storm, she felt a flicker of defiance. If the world had abandoned her, if the forest itself had tried to claim her life, she would prove that she was more than the weak girl left behind. She would survive. She would save him. Snow blinded her eyes, but she refused to stop. One foot in front of the other. One breath. One heartbeat. The Alpha's weight was a constant reminder of her responsibility, of the fragile line between life and death. Her fingers slipped on the icy rocks, her boots scraping against frozen roots, but she never let him fall. Not once. By late afternoon, exhaustion nearly claimed her. Her body trembled, and her mind wavered between focus and despair. She pressed a hand to her lips, tasting blood from a cut on her cheek. Rylan stirred, a faint groan escaping his lips. Lyra's heart leaped painfully in her chest, You must hold on, she whispered, her voice hoarse. The wind swallowed her words, but she believed they reached him somehow. Somewhere deep inside, he would hear her resolve. Hours blurred together until at last she reached the edge of the forest, a clearing where the snow was thinner, the trees less menacing. In the distance, the faint glow of a cabin or outpost shimmered through the blizzard, promising warmth and safety. Lyra felt a spark of hope, fragile as ice, yet stronger than the cold that had threatened to claim her. But hope brought its own fear. She had carried him this far, but could she make the last stretch? Could she summon the strength to keep moving when her body refused to obey? She knelt briefly in the snow, pressing Ryland to her chest, and allowed herself a single moment of despair. The Alpha's hand brushed her arm again, and this time she felt intention, recognition. Even in the haze of poison and cold, he was aware. Her pulse quickened, not just from the exertion, but from something unfamiliar, something that made her stomach twist. Fear? Respect? Awe? She didn't know. She only knew that she would not let him die. Not him! Not the wolf whose strength had haunted the lands, whose presence had loomed in every tale she had ever heard, and whose fate now rested in her hands. With a final, shuddering effort, Lyra rose. She could hear the forest sigh around her, as if it too acknowledged her determination. Step by step, she carried him toward the faint light. Her muscles burned, her lungs screamed, her heart threatened to break under the weight of his body, and yet she did not falter. She refused. The storm raged around her, snow blinding her, wind lashing at her face, but through the chaos she could sense something else, something alive and vigilant. The forest seemed to watch her struggle, to test her endurance, to measure her worth. She was tired, yes, but more than that, she was resolute. She had endured a lifetime of rejection, a childhood of abandonment, and now she would endure the storm itself to save a life she could not ignore. Finally, she reached the edge of the clearing. The faint light grew stronger. A cabin, perhaps abandoned, perhaps empty.
Shelter! Warmth! Safety! Lyra collapsed into the snow, the Alpha still cradled in her arms.
Her breath came in ragged gasps, and the world spun around her, white and endless. Ryland stirred again, his golden eyes flickering open. For a heartbeat, Lyra thought he might curse her for her intrusion, for daring to touch a king, a predator of the forest. But instead his gaze softened, and he murmured her name. Lyra! The sound was like fire against ice, warm and dangerous and filled with unspoken weight. She froze, her heart clenching in fear and wonder. He knew her. He knew her name. And somehow in that single moment, she realized the world had shifted. She had carried him through the storm. She had defied the forest, the blizzard, and even her own doubts. And now the Alpha King knew she existed. The wind howled, the snow whipped at them both, but for a brief instant the storm quieted in her mind. She had saved him. She had survived, and yet, as Ryland's gaze locked with hers, she felt a tremor of unease. The Alpha's eyes burned with intensity, pride, and something else, a claim she could not yet understand. Lyra's body shook, not from cold alone, but from the weight of the moment. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere deep within she felt the stirrings of a bond, fragile and perilous, forming in the frozen silence. The storm would not forgive them yet. But for the first time in her life, Lyra felt something unfamiliar. The thrill of being needed, of being seen, of being alive in a world that had long forgotten her. And then Ryland whispered again, his voice low and commanding. You carried me 6 miles through the storm, Lyra. You are stronger than you know. Strength, he said. He called her strong. Lyra's chest ached, her exhaustion forgotten for a moment, replaced by a pulse of fear, awe, and something else she could not name. She had saved the Alpha King. But what would he do now that he knew her? The forest howled. The storm raged. And Lyra, the lone Omega, realized she was no longer alone. The cabin was small and humble, a faint glow of fire spilling through the cracks in the walls. Inside, the warmth was shocking against the frozen cold that had clung to Lyra for hours. She laid Rylan carefully on a bed of furs, her fingers brushing against his hair as she checked his pulse. Alive.
Still alive. That was all that mattered.
Rylan's eyes fluttered open, golden orbs sharpening into focus. For a moment he seemed lost, his gaze swimming with confusion and pain. Then, slowly, recognition filled his expression. He was awake, and he was aware. Lyra's heart thumped in her chest. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice raw from shouting over the storm and the sheer exertion of carrying him.
You...
Rylan's voice was weak, hoarse, yet commanding even in fragility.
Who are you?" "I'm Lyra," she said simply. "I found you. You were poisoned. I carried you through the storm."
Her words came quickly, almost as if the act itself had been too fast to explain. Rylan studied her, his lips pressed into a thin line, his brow furrowing.
"You carried me." 6 miles through a blizzard?
His voice was incredulous, mingled with disbelief and something else she could not name. Pride, perhaps. Or respect. Lyra shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, though every muscle in her body screamed with exhaustion.
"You would have died if I hadn't."
Rylan's gaze lingered on her, and Lyra felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. There was intensity there, an unspoken question in the golden depths of his eyes. He studied her as if trying to see past the snow and exhaustion and into her very soul.
"You,"
he said finally, voice low.
"You are not of my pack."
"No," Lyra admitted. "I am alone."
"Always alone."
The Alpha King's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. Alone, yet capable of carrying me through death itself.
"Remarkable."
Lyra stiffened.
"Remarkable. Such a word, spoken by the most feared and powerful Alpha in the Northern Territories, carried weight she could barely comprehend."
For so long she had been called defective, weak, unworthy. Yet here he was, staring at her as if she might be more than she believed herself to be.
"I'm not remarkable," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. I had to."
Rylan's gaze did not leave her. Slowly he sat up, wincing as the movement pulled at his poisoned veins. He reached out a hand, hesitating, then brushed a strand of snow-damp hair from her face. The touch was light, almost delicate, but it carried the weight of command. Lyra froze, her heart hammering.
"You have courage,"
he said, voice stronger now, "and strength beyond what most can imagine."
"I see it, and I will not forget it."
Lyra lowered her gaze. She had never been seen in this way, not by her family, not by any pack, not even by herself, and yet the words warmed something cold and empty inside her.
"I don't know if I'm
deserving," she whispered, "of your trust, of your—" She trailed off, realizing she had almost said more than she intended. "Of my protection," Rylan supplied, his voice steady, strong, but not unkind. His eyes held her captive, golden fire against the dull glow of the cabin. Or perhaps more.
"You have survived what many could not. You have carried me when I was at death's door, and for that you are bound to me, Lyra, whether you wish it or not."
The words struck her like ice. Bound?
Not just by survival, not just by circumstance, but by something deeper, something fated and ancient. She had heard tales of Alpha and Luna bonds, how they were forged by blood, trust, and trials, but she had never imagined it could be hers, and certainly not with him.
"You claim me?" she asked softly, disbelief edging her tone.
"Yes,"
he said simply, his gaze unwavering.
"As Luna, my Luna. You are chosen."
Lyra's heart stuttered.
"Chosen."
She had been unwanted her whole life, abandoned for being defective.
And now, this powerful, untouchable Alpha King claimed her as his mate, his partner, the one who would stand beside him in strength, in battle, and in life. The thought terrified her, exhilarated her, and filled her with a longing she had never known. I cannot, she whispered. I am not ready. I am not enough. Rylan rose, stepping closer, his presence filling the room. Even weakened, even poisoned, he radiated command, power, and something that made her knees weak. Enough, he said, voice low, almost questioning. Lyra, do you not see? The world has measured your worth for too long. The pack has cast aside those it deemed weak. But I see what others do not. And what I see is what matters. You are strong. You are brave. You are my Luna, whether you accept it now or later. Lyra swallowed hard. His words both comforted and terrified her. She had survived storms, abandonment, and rejection, but now she faced a storm of the heart, one she could not outrun. Lyra, Rylan continued, the curse that shadows my bloodline is tied to the Luna I choose. If you refuse me, the danger you face will only grow. Your past, your defect, all of it is part of what will either save us or destroy us. Lyra's stomach twisted. Curse. She had known life had been harsh, but curses? Magic? Destinies bound to bloodlines? It was overwhelming. Yet underneath the fear, a spark of determination burned. She had carried him through the blizzard. She had survived when all others thought she would fail. Perhaps this bond, this destiny, could be the thing she had been searching for all her life. I need time, she whispered finally. I am not ready to accept it. Rylan's golden eyes softened, yet they still held the fire of command. Time is a luxury we may not have. But I will wait. I will protect you. I will show you what it means to be Luna, whether by choice or necessity. The hours passed in silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Lyra tended to his wounds, cleaning and binding them as best she could. Rylan watched her, sometimes making small comments, sometimes silent, his gaze never leaving her. Every glance, every word carried weight, and Lyra felt herself pulled into the orbit of a presence she had never known could exist, one that demanded respect, fear, and admiration all at once. Night fell, deep and unbroken. The storm outside had eased slightly, snow falling softly now, as if the forest itself paused to watch the new bond forming within the cabin walls. Rylan finally spoke again, his voice quieter, more intimate. You are not just an Omega, Lyra, he said. You are something more. You have strength I have not seen in decades. And the pack? The world will notice it too, whether they wish to or not. Lyra shivered. Not from cold. His words were heavy with promise and warning. She had lived her life in shadows, always at the edge of belonging. Now, the possibility of acceptance, of purpose, of even love. It was terrifying in its magnitude, yet beneath fear a flicker of hope stirred. Perhaps she was not defective. Perhaps she was exactly what the world, and he, needed. The cabin was quiet, but Lyra could feel the tension between them, electric and potent. Rylan's eyes softened, yet they were unyielding in their intensity. She realized that the Alpha King's claim was not just about power or bloodlines. It was about trust, courage, and a bond that could either break them or make them unstoppable. Sleep came reluctantly, but it came. Lyra lay near the fire, restless, haunted by the storm, by Rylan, by the weight of destiny pressing upon her. The first steps of a bond had been taken, but the road ahead was uncertain. Danger lurked beyond the cabin, both in the forest and within the hearts of those who would challenge her claim as Luna. And as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, the wind whispered through the trees like a chorus of unseen spirits. Somewhere deep in the north, a shadow moved, watching, waiting, The curse that clung to Ryland's bloodline was not idle, and the bond they had begun to forge would soon be tested by forces neither of them could yet see. Lyra dreamed of golden eyes in the snow, of fire against ice, of strength and fear entwined. She dreamed of the claim that had been laid upon her and of a path she had never known she would walk. And somewhere in the shadows a whisper promised that the trials of her heart and of her destiny were only beginning. The snow had melted from the trees in patches, but the forest still held the chill of winter. Icicles hung from branches like fragile glass, glinting in the pale light of the morning. Lyra and Ryland walked together now side by side, though every step was heavy with unspoken tension. Lyra carried a small pack with supplies, but her mind was elsewhere. She had spent the night by the fire, restless, haunted by dreams of golden eyes and shadowed forests. The Alpha's claim lingered in her thoughts, a weight she could not ignore.
He had called her his Luna. He had seen strength in her that she had long denied. But with the recognition came responsibility, danger, and a fear she could not name. Ryland walked beside her silently, his presence commanding without words. Even in recovery, he radiated authority. Wolves in the distance paused to watch them pass, sensing the bond forming between the Alpha and the Omega.
Lyra could feel their awareness, their scrutiny, and it made her chest tighten. She had always been an outsider. Now, even the wild regarded her as significant. "You walk as if you carry the weight of the world," Ryland said finally, his voice low, almost teasing, but with a hint of concern. "Do you not trust yourself?" Lyra shook her head, staring at the frozen ground. "I trust myself to survive," she said quietly. "But I don't know if I can bear the responsibility of being Luna. Not yet." Ryland's gaze softened. "Strength is not only in survival," he said.
"It is in facing what terrifies you and choosing to move forward anyway. You have already done that, Lyra.
You have survived storms, poison, and despair. You are stronger than you know." She looked at him, trying to measure the intensity in his eyes.
"Golden, fierce, unyielding."
It was more than admiration. It was recognition, claim, and something dangerous in its depth. She felt the warmth of his words, yet a shadow of doubt lingered.
Could she ever live up to this? Could she stand beside him unbroken when the world had spent her life trying to destroy her?
Their path led them deeper into the forest, where the air grew colder and the snow became icy underfoot. Wolves howled in the distance, warning or calling. It was hard to tell. Ryland paused at the edge of a clearing, his eyes narrowing. "Here," he said, his tone sharp.
"This is where the first test begins."
Lyra glanced around, unsure what he meant. The clearing was empty, save for a frozen pond and twisted, snow-covered trees. Ryland approached the center and knelt, placing his hand on the ice. The surface rippled, though the wind was still. Lyra stepped closer, curiosity mixed with unease.
"This,"
Ryland said, voice low, "is a reflection of what the curse has left upon my bloodline.
Every Luna must confront it. It will show you your fears, your pain, and what lies hidden in your heart. Only by facing it can you survive as my Luna."
Lyra's breath caught. A test. She had survived storms and poison, but a trial of the heart and mind? That was something she had never faced. Her body trembled, partly from the cold, partly from the knowledge that this was no ordinary challenge. Ryland's hand lingered on the ice, golden eyes locked on hers.
"Do you wish to proceed?"
She hesitated. The thought of confronting the shadows of her past, of the abandonment and rejection that had haunted her, was terrifying. Yet she saw the fire in his gaze, the trust, the claim, and something more. Perhaps this was the chance she had been waiting for. Perhaps this was the way to prove herself, not just to him, but to herself.
I will,"
she said finally, her voice firm. Ryland nodded. The ice beneath her feet trembled, then shattered, revealing a swirling reflection that was not the forest above, but a vision of her own memories. Lyra gasped. She saw herself as a child, small and trembling, left at the edge of a cliff by her own pack. Their faces were cold, their eyes filled with disdain. "Defective," one had whispered.
Unworthy, another said.
The words echoed in her mind, carrying the weight of every year she had spent in loneliness. Tears burned her eyes, but she did not look away.
She had faced storms. She had carried the Alpha through death. She could face this. She stepped forward, her reflection twisting, showing her fears, but also her courage. Every step through the vision made her heart pound, but she pressed on. Rylan watched, silent, yet his presence was a shield against the storm of memories.
"Do not run from what you were," he said softly. "It does not define you. It is what you survived that matters." Lyra's reflection began to shift. The frightened child became a young warrior, standing tall against the wind, against the storm, against the pack that had abandoned her. She felt a surge of power, a recognition of strength she had always denied.
But then, a shadow appeared behind her reflection. A figure from her past, twisted and menacing. It spoke her name in a whisper that made her stomach twist. "You do not belong," it said. "You are nothing." Lyra faltered.
The vision surged, threatening to overwhelm her. But a warm hand grasped hers, Rylan's. His presence steadied her, his golden eyes locking onto hers. "You do belong,"
he said firmly.
"And you are more than this shadow. Face it, Lyra. Claim yourself." Her chest heaved.
She took a deep breath and stepped forward, confronting the shadow. The icy wind of her fear whipped around her, but she did not retreat. She raised her chin, and for the first time the voice of her past could not pierce her resolve. The shadow screamed, twisted, and dissolved into the air, leaving only the reflection of Lyra standing tall, unbroken, and strong.
Rylan's grip on her hand lingered, and he spoke quietly, almost reverently. "You have done well. This is only the beginning, but you are ready."
Lyra felt a mixture of relief, pride, and something else, something warm and dangerous blooming in her chest. She realized that her survival, her strength, and her courage were no longer just hers. They were part of the bond forming between them, fragile and powerful, as real as the snow beneath their feet. But the forest was never still for long. As they stepped away from the ice, the sound of snapping branches reached them. Wolves emerged from the tree line, their eyes glowing with unnatural light. Lyra's heart leapt.
She had survived storms, poison, and visions, but now she faced a new threat. Rylan moved instantly, placing himself between her and the wolves. His stance was protective, commanding, and fierce. The Alpha's presence alone seemed to make the wolves hesitate, though they continued to advance, teeth bared, eyes glowing. "They are not ordinary wolves," Rylan said, voice low. "They are tied to the curse. They test us. We must show strength together."
Lyra nodded, her hands trembling, but determination burning in her eyes.
She could fight. She could survive. And she could stand beside him. Together they moved as one, a unit forged not just by survival, but by trust and the bond growing between them. The wolves circled, snapping, testing, but neither Lyra nor Rylan faltered. Step by step, strike by strike, they drove the creatures back, their movements synchronized, unspoken understanding flowing between them. Lyra realized in that moment that the Alpha had chosen wisely. She could fight, she could endure, and together they were unstoppable. When the last wolf fled into the forest, the silence that followed was heavy and profound. Lyra's chest heaved, adrenaline fading, leaving only the warmth of the bond that had carried them through danger.
Rylan's gaze met hers, golden eyes softening yet still burning with intensity.
"You are ready," he said simply. "And yet, the trials are far from over. Others will come, testing not just your strength, but your heart." Lyra nodded, understanding. She had faced storms, visions, and creatures of the curse, but the journey was only beginning.
The bond between her and Rylan deepened, forged in fire and ice, but the road ahead would demand more. Trust, courage, and strength would be tested again and again.
And as they walked through the forest side by side, Lyra realized that for the first time she did not feel alone. The shadow of her past had been confronted, the bond had begun, and though danger lingered, she felt a flicker of hope, a spark that could grow into something stronger, something unbreakable. Yet in the distance, where the trees grew dense and dark, another shadow watched, silent and patient.
It knew of Lyra's past, of the bond forming between her and Rylan, and it whispered promises of trials yet to come. The curse was not idle. The forest was alive, and destiny would not be denied. Lyra felt the cold wind against her face, but it no longer chilled her entirely. She had survived the first trial. She had stood against her fears.
And she had begun to understand the depth of the bond that had claimed her. Rylan walked beside her, silent but unwavering, his presence a shield and a guide. She glanced at him, golden eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment, and felt the weight of his claim. Luna, his Luna. The title carried power, promise, and danger. But it also carried something she had never known: belonging. And as the forest whispered around them, Lyra understood that her journey was far from over.
Shadows awaited. Trials awaited.
But she was no longer the child abandoned at the edge of the mountains. She was strong, resilient, and bound by something that neither storm nor curse could break. The night was still, but it carried a strange weight. Snow had returned to the forest, falling softly into the glow of a full moon. Its silver light painted the world in quiet brilliance, yet shadows lingered between the trees. Every sound, the crack of a branch, the rustle of a hidden animal, felt amplified, as if the forest itself held its breath. Lyra stood at the edge of a frozen clearing, her breath misting in the cold night air. Rylan was beside her, his golden eyes scanning the dark tree line. The bond between them had grown stronger with every trial. Through blizzards, poison, visions of the past, and the cursed wolves that tested their courage. Yet tonight would demand more. A figure emerged from the shadows, the same one that had watched Lyra since the clearing by the frozen pond. Its presence radiated malice and cunning, a reminder that the curse that haunted Rylan's bloodline was not yet ended. "You are brave, little Omega," the shadow hissed, its voice carrying on the wind. "But bravery alone cannot save you."
Not now. Not from what is coming.
Lyra's chest tightened, but she did not step back. She had faced storms, poison, visions, and wolves of the curse, and she had survived.
She would not falter now, not while Rylan stood beside her.
Rylan moved closer, his body tense and ready.
"You threaten my Luna," he said, his voice low, but carrying the authority of a king. "Leave, or face the consequences."
The shadow laughed, a cold, hollow sound.
"Consequences,"
it whispered.
"The consequences are already here. The bond you claim is fragile, Alpha. One misstep, one hesitation, and it will shatter."
Lyra's hands clenched at her sides. She could feel the fear rising, but beneath it burned determination. She would not be the frightened child left at the edge of the mountains.
She would not be cast aside again.
The bond with Rylan, the trust forming between them, was stronger than any shadow, stronger than the curse itself. The shadow lunged, moving faster than her eyes could track. Lyra reacted instinctively, stepping aside and calling out, "Rylan!" He moved with her, a seamless flow of strength and command. Together they met the attack, Rylan's presence anchoring her, giving her courage she did not know she possessed.
The shadow split, as if made of smoke and ice, striking from multiple angles. "You are stronger together than you realize," Rylan said, voice steady. "Focus, Lyra. Trust yourself."
"Trust me," Lyra nodded, feeling the warmth of his words against the cold terror in her chest. She raised her hands, calling on the energy that had surged through her during the ice pond vision. Light shimmered around her, a reflection of the courage she had claimed from her fears. The shadow recoiled, hissing, unable to pierce her resolve. Together they fought, moving as one. Rylan's strength and command complemented her courage and determination. Every strike, every step, every glance reinforced the bond that had begun months ago in the blizzard. The shadow faltered, confused by their unity, unable to break what had been forged through trials of fire and ice. Finally, Lyra stepped forward, heart pounding, and faced the shadow directly. "I am not the child you left behind," she shouted, voice ringing through the clearing. "I am Lyra! Strong, alive, and bound to him!" The shadow shrieked, dissolving into mist, vanishing with a sound like cracking ice. Silence fell, broken only by the soft patter of snow. Lyra sank to her knees, chest heaving but alive. Rylan knelt beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder.
"You faced it," he said softly, "and you survived."
Not just the shadow, but yourself. That is what makes you my Luna."
Lyra's eyes met his, golden eyes meeting amber fire, and for the first time she felt the full weight of the bond they shared. Not just a title, not just survival, but trust, respect, and something deeper, something unspoken yet undeniable.
She began, but the words faltered. She realized that words could not capture what she felt.
Relief, pride, fear, longing, and something unnameable all mingled in her chest. Rylan smiled faintly, a rare softness in his features. "No words are needed. The bond is real. You have proven yourself in ways that no vision, no storm, and no curse could measure. You are my Luna."
And together we are stronger than anything the world may throw at us.
The forest around them seemed to exhale, the wind stirring gently, carrying whispers of approval from unseen spirits.
Wolves howled in the distance, not as threats but as acknowledgement of the new power forming in the clearing. Lyra felt a warmth spread through her chest, the kind of warmth that comes from being seen, being claimed, and being understood. But even in the quiet, they knew the trials were not entirely over. The curse lingered, faint and whispering, like the last echoes of a long winter storm. And yet the bond they had forged was stronger than the shadows that sought to undo them. Rylan rose, extending a hand to help Lyra to her feet. She took it, feeling the strength in his grip, the reassurance in his touch. Together they moved toward the heart of the clearing where the silver moonlight shone brightest, reflecting in the ice and snow like a promise. "You have changed," Rylan said quietly. "Not just in what you endured, but in who you are now. Stronger, wiser, and no longer alone." Lyra's lips curved faintly. "I have survived," she said, voice steady. "And I have learned that strength is not just about enduring. It's about trusting, letting someone stand beside you, even when it's terrifying." Rylan's eyes softened, the golden fire dimming to warmth. "Then we are ready," he said. "The pack will follow us, and the curse, whatever remains of it, will have to face both of us. Together!" Lyra nodded, feeling the truth of his words. The forest, the shadows, the blizzards, the visions, they had all led her here to this moment. No longer abandoned, no longer defective, she stood as Rylan's Luna, his equal in courage, his partner in fate. They returned to the pack citadel as dawn approached, the first light of day casting long shadows across the snow. Wolves watched them, eyes glowing with acknowledgement. The pack sensed the bond, the unity, and the strength that now radiated from Lyra and Ryland. They were no longer two individuals surviving the world. They were a force, bound by courage, trust, and love. Inside the citadel, Rylan addressed the pack, his voice strong and commanding. "This is Lyra," he said, eyes locking with hers. "She is my Luna. She has faced trials that would break the strongest among us. She is worthy, and together we will lead this pack into a future free of fear and bound by trust." Lyra felt a surge of pride and relief. For the first time, she belonged. Not because she had survived alone, but because she had been recognized, chosen, and trusted. Her past would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had claimed herself, and Rylan had claimed her, not as a possession, but as a partner. Days passed, and the pack flourished under their joint leadership.
Lyra trained with the wolves, learned the ancient ways of the Alpha, and grew into her role as Luna. Every trial she had faced, the blizzard, the poison, the visions, the shadow wolves, had strengthened her not just in body, but in heart and spirit. One evening, under the light of a full moon, Rylan and Lyra stood at the edge of a frozen river. Snow fell softly, the air crisp and clear. Lyra's eyes met his, and for a moment, words were unnecessary. Their hands found each other, fingers intertwined, the bond between them unspoken yet complete. "You are mine," Rylan whispered, voice low, a gentle claim that carried the weight of truth. "And you are mine," Lyra replied, her voice steady, carrying the certainty of survival, trust, and love. The moon reflected on the ice, casting silver light across their faces. In that moment the curse felt distant, the shadows diminished, and the forest seemed to hum with approval. They had faced the storm, the visions, and the shadows, and they had emerged stronger, together. Lyra realized that the true test was never just survival. It was learning to trust, to love, and to claim herself as more than the world had allowed. And in Rylan she had found a mirror of that courage, a partner who recognized her strength and stood beside her, unyielding and unwavering. The forest whispered around them, carrying promises of trials yet to come, but Lyra no longer feared them. She had found her place, her purpose, and her bond. The Lone Omega had become Luna, not by accident, but by courage, trust, and the enduring power of the heart. Rylan's golden eyes met hers once more, filled with warmth, fire, and the promise of the future. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "we will face it together." Lyra smiled, the chill of the night forgotten. "Together!" She echoed the word, carrying strength, hope, and the promise of love that neither storm nor curse could break. The moon shone brightly above, silver and eternal. And beneath its light, the Alpha King and his Luna stood together, their bond unshakable, their hearts united, and their destiny forever intertwined.